At the Letters, brought to you by the all-new 2019 Ford Ranger, Ben Nicholson-Smith, Arden Zwelling. Producer Almal Delich is here, Drew Livingstone's working the cameras. It's September baseball, baby, which is kind of like its own thing. They like the cliche is don't trust anything that happens in April and September, but like September baseball is kind of, you look at that Orioles series the Blue Jays just played, like what was that?
Yeah, it was weird, eh? I mean, you're watching a lot of players play for themselves and play for individual numbers and accomplishments, because on a team level, you had 200 combined losses every single night taking the field. So it really does become about the individual efforts. And it's so interesting because the stadium is empty. You have, I presume relatively small MLB TV audiences or TV audiences. And yet the games keep going, and the players still are tasked with bringing that same intensity that they always would.
And I think that is the misconception is people say, oh, these players don't care, right? And you wrote a bit about this at Sportsnet.ca this week. Like, oh, these players, it's September, they're mailing it in. At field level, I think it is just as intense and important to players as it would be in May or June. I think the difference is in the clubhouse before the game, it is a bit more loose. Like the Blue Jays aren't taking batting practice every day. Guys are, hitting when they need to. And it's, get your work in, do what you need to do, but we're not going to really institute anything. And, I think that I would imagine that in the 30 minutes before game time, the feeling in the clubhouse is a bit different than if you were in a pennant race. But in between the lines, on the mound and in the batter's box, this still matters just as much to these players because a lot of them, like you said, are receiving major league opportunities and are kind of playing for their futures.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even if you look at it from a really big picture standpoint, as we sit here, we're looking at trends in the game and we're saying, okay, the Orioles are part of this tanking and part of this, you have these super teams and you have these 100-loss teams, and is this a problem for baseball? The guys on the field are not worried about that. They're looking across the diamond. They would certainly be aware that the Orioles aren't a good team, but I'm not sure that they're necessarily putting them in one category and then the Mariners in a slightly different category and the Reds are a little better than that. It's a major league team. You're going to go out there and play to your absolute best that you can. You're going to prepare almost to the same level that you would if you're playing the Rays. I don't think there's a big difference in preparation. And you watch these guys, even just, and this is maybe veering a little bit too far into amateur psychology, but you see Jordan Romano on the mound after he gives up a home run to Chris Davis or after he leaves with the bases loaded. The look on his face is not one of disinterest or it's not dispassionate. He is someone who is out there and feeling the emotion of that moment because it is a big moment for him or for a lot of these guys.
Even a veteran guy like Justin Smoke, who's been around the block a number of times, every plate appearance is contributing to what he might be able to get in free agency.
Yeah.
So it matters if you're young, it matters if you're old. The coaches, it still matters too. When they put that dugout camera on the broadcast and you see how the coaches are hanging on to, everything that happens, they're invested in these players. I just don't like hearing they don't care, they're just mailing it in.
For sure. And I think even John Schneider, who we had on the audio version of At the Letters this week, was talking to that very point and making the point that coaches are zoned in, trying to catch whatever they can with the opposition, whether it's a sign that they're noticing or someone on the other team stealing signs, they all do it.
Thank you for picking me up there, because I did not plug the John Schneider podcast on the audio-only version of Athletics, wherever you get your podcasts. However these things all work these days, I don't know. But go get it. John Schneider joined us for 30, 40 minutes, broke down some cool stuff about sign stealing. We obviously talked about the kids, who he knows well, talked about his first year in the majors, so go check that out on Friday for At the Letters. Bo Bichette, one of the guys that we talked about, and this kind of relates to what you were just talking about with players really wanting to play and really wanting to compete and really wanting to be on the field right now. Yeah, Bo Bichette really wants to be on that field right now as he's suffering from a concussion, but I don't need to see him play again this year. Talking to him in New York just about what he's going through with this concussion, headaches, nausea, trouble sleeping. It looks like he's kind of gotten past his symptoms right now, but with 3 games left in the season, I'm sure it would be nice for him to get back in the lineup. But if I'm the Blue Jays, I'm saying, hey, Bo, you had a great year. Let's just put a pin in it right there. Let's make sure you get past this. There is no need to take a risk at all with a head injury right now.
I 100% agree. I think that he's way too important to the future of the franchise to push it even a little bit. I mean, this isn't a question where you're on a contending team. Even then, he's 21 years old, and you're talking about a potential head injury. So I think even if the Jays were contending, you would have to be super cautious. But they are not contending. This is not even close to that. So really, it makes sense to exercise all kinds of caution. Put him through every last test. Put him through it again. And really, there's just so little to gain compared to how much there is to lose.
And you can actually pass MLB's concussion protocol, and which will prove that your health is fine, but that doesn't necessarily measure your performance. The MLB concussion protocol is it's good and it's thorough, but you are going through things like you're getting your heart rate up on a bike, right? And then seeing if you're asymptomatic after that. And then you got to go run sprints, and you got to hit, and you got to push yourself exertion wise. And then you're going to test afterwards, do you have symptoms? Do you not? How are you feeling? And a lot of it's self-reporting from the players. But yeah, hopefully trainers would have a good idea of, how much they trust what a player is telling them. But that doesn't really test performance. That doesn't test how your eyes are working in concert with your brain, right? You can be symptom free and get to the plate and still not be really able to pick up the spin on a curveball like you once were. Your depth perception might still be a little bit off, and you're at shortstop and you've got a hard grounder coming at you there, and you might not be able to gauge that and read that the way you were before. And it's impossible to replicate a game scenario when Luis Rivera's hitting you ground balls or when John Schneider's throwing you batting practice. You don't know that until you're actually in the game. So yeah, I think there's a difference between health and performance here that needs to, that the Blue Jays need to be cognizant of.
Yeah, and the most important thing, obviously, is the health. But even if you look at it from the standpoint of what the Blue Jays were trying to figure out about Bichette this year, they've already pretty much answered that question. He was really good at AAA. He's been even better in the majors. Defensively, offensively, he's put it together. So you're not going into the offseason with some sort of unanswered question as a team. And that's even setting aside the health question. But as a team, you know where he fits. He's your starting shortstop of the future. So when it comes to answering questions about the roster of the Blue Jays, in a weird way, it's not necessarily the worst thing to have a chance of, okay, let's see Brandon Drury at shortstop. How does he look? Let's see Breivik Valera at shortstop. How does he look? Is he the first guy to come off the roster when it's time to find some space on the 40-man, or is he number 5? Basically, where does he rank? So it's not the worst thing to have a chance to look at these guys for a few games either.
And the Blue Jays will actually have some vision testing that they'll put Bichette through. He'll have provided baselines during spring training. They will have updated those, and he's going to have to pass those vision tests, and that's beyond MLB's concussion protocol. So even if he does clear the hoops of MLB concussions protocol, he's got to then clear the Blue Jays concussion protocol. I don't need to see him again. I don't think we're going to see him again, not until next spring when guys like him and Vlad and Kevin Biggio are going to try to follow up the seasons that they've had. For Bichette, it's going to be hard to do much better than he has. For Kevin Biggio, I'm sure he wants to be consistent with the plate approach that he's shown and the discipline and some of the power that he's demonstrated. With Vladimir Guerrero Jr., you've got to think that this is a guy who wants to perform a lot better next spring and who needs to spend the next 3 to 4 months really focusing on some hard work that needs to be done in terms of his body composition and his fitness to put him in the best possible position to do that next year.
Right. And Vlad Jr. had, in some ways, a season that was successful. And we talked about this at Sportsnet.ca and Blue Jays Confidential this week. But it's a season that, in some ways, was successful because he's 20 years old and objectively an above average hitter. But at the same time, when you look at the injuries, when you look at some of the missed time, when you look at him saying that he is slightly fatigued right now and not in the shape that he wants to be in, then there's clearly room for improvement. And the Blue Jays want that. Vlad Jr. wants that. And we'll see if it happens. I mean, it's really going to be interesting. I'm not sure if it'll be probably shy down there on day one of spring training for us in 2020. And that first look at Vlad Jr. will be really interesting just to see what kind of shape he arrives in. I mean, is it pretty much like this, or has he trimmed down some of that excess weight and maybe even added muscle?
And who among us at 20 didn't need to, trim a bit of fat and, add a bit of muscle, right? And lean out a little bit. Some of us still do, still need to now at 30. But this is a guy who the expectations were sky high for a reason. 950 OPS in the minors, more walks than strikeouts. Like, I consider this season a bit of a disappointment for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Like, certainly underwhelming. Obviously, he's an above average hitter, like you said, at 20 in the majors. Like, that's a considerable accomplishment. Like, that is not a lot of guys are able to do that. Like, a lot of guys his age haven't even been drafted yet. So like that is something, but I think the expectations were higher for what he was going to do in this first season. I think there was good reason for them to be higher. And I think that, grading on that curve, it's a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's almost like, those kids in school who are just so smart that they don't even have to study.
Yeah.
And they're like child prodigies, and they get good grades, and they're just understand everything right away. And there comes a point for those people that they have to apply themselves if they want to excel in whatever field that they're in. So you can't just get by on natural ability, as impressive as that might be. And obviously in Vlad's case, it's very impressive. There is a point where he's going to have to apply himself. And it's not to say that, I don't mean to suggest that he hasn't applied himself before, because he certainly has in some ways, but he is saying himself he wants to take it to another level. So that can be what's happening in the course of the next few months for him.
And I think that he is experiencing for the first time things not going well in his baseball life. Like, this is a kid who is hit literally from, they came out of the womb, like crushing homers, and has been, not met a level of baseball that he hasn't been able to dominate yet. And now he's met it, right? And he also hasn't, met a season that he hasn't been able to, get through and feel good about. And now here he is in September, like admitting that he's tired. Clearly doesn't look like himself at the plate right now. I think you've also seen him deal with kind of the mental hurdles of playing at this level and dealing with failure, which is part of it for every ball player, right? And we've seen him get frustrated at times and get out of his approach at times. And I think a hallmark of really good ball players is that when they fail and when things don't go right for them, and when you don't get that, when a pitch off the plate is called a strike or whatever, like when you deal with that stuff, it's staying within yourself, staying within your approach, not letting it affect what you do at the plate. And I think that's been a learning experience for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. this season. I think if he understands everything that he's gone through this year, and he takes that and applies that to motivate himself this offseason to come back leaner next year and, to be better prepared for the rigors of an MLB season, both physically and mentally, like I think we could see him like go off. Like I think we could see a prolific 2020. But we're really not going to know whether we can expect that or not, like you said, until we see him in Dunedin in February.
Yeah, a lot rides on it. And, we were talking to some people the other day who just suggest that if that does happen, and if Vlad does get in shape, then that breakout could happen next year. And it's really not hard to imagine, right? I mean, when you think about how few 20-year-olds have this kind of success that Vlad Jr. has had, when you think about the mental off-field lessons that he has learned, and the fact that he's saying he's committed to getting into better shape, those are all really good things for this team. So set aside the whole question of does he work out, does he lift? Yes, he lifts, he works out, he goes to the gym. Yeah. Of course he does. So now it's really a good thing for the Blue Jays that he's motivated to get into better shape, and we'll see where that leads them, but the potential is really high.
Yeah, something was lost in translation there, and obviously he misspoke, and what he meant to say was, I've never had like a dedicated training regime and program that I've followed over an off season before. Like I've just gone to the Dominican and did whatever I did with Wilton Guerrero and my uncle, right? And flipped tires and took, 700 swings every day. I don't think he ever had a routine where it was like, all right, today, is a recovery day from your heavy lift session yesterday. And we're just going to do like some bands and some TRX stuff or whatever. That's what he meant to say. Of course, he's lifted a weight. He's a professional athlete, and you just look at the lad, right?
Yeah.
Just like while he is clearly like carrying a bit too much body fat right now, like there is a good base there of like some very strong core muscles. Like that's how this guy is hitting the ball as hard as he does, right? Like his strong legs, like strong ass, strong back, strong shoulders. Like 4 of the 8 hardest hit balls in MLB this year came off his bat at 20.
So you're working with something really solid there.
And he's going to gain power as he grows, you know? Like, and another thing I would push back against is the thought that, like, oh, if he trims down and if he, like, loses some weight, he's not going to be as good of a hitter, right? You do hear this stuff.
No, I know.
though, right?
I'm not laughing at you. Yeah.
Yeah, like, you hear it that, like, you know, oh, well, maybe the weight is what allows him to, like, hit the ball that hard, to be that good. Like, it's just kind of a ridiculous, the logic doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Go ahead.
I mean, because if you extend that logic, then Bo Bichette should go out and add 20 pounds of fat, right? Like, if you extend that logic that, yes, a player needs fat to be able to produce power, then, all right, Bo Bichette, like, all right, Nate Pearson, like, we're going to take you guys and, like, keep you out of the gym. We're going to feed you all kinds of pizza and beer and just, like, fatten you up because that's what we need. That's HP now. Like, no, that's not the way it works.
Let's get 25 chunky dudes. And, losing the weight isn't going to make him a worse hitter, and he's not going to lose power. Like if anything, it's just going to make him better. And the biggest thing beyond around all of this is the longevity concern, because when you are carrying bad weight, it puts unnecessary tax on your tendons and your ligaments. We know he's had knee issues in the past. We know he's had oblique issues in the past. Like, you are just more susceptible to injury if you are not in the best shape possible, especially in a game like baseball where you are playing every day. And the expectation is you're going to play maybe not 162, but 145, 150 in a 6-month period. You're going to put a lot of tax on those joints and those ligaments and everything that's going on in your musculature. And the less bad weight you're carrying, the less tax is going to be on those things.
For sure. I mean, Vladdy says he wants to play 162. I don't know if that's ever going to happen for him in the course of his career, because not a lot of guys do that anymore, and it's not asked of a lot of guys.
I think Bo could do it.
Yeah, Bo is probably one of the few, and Montoyo seems willing to go down that path with him. But Vladdy maybe plays 145, 150. I mean, that would be pretty good if he gets into that many next year.
Yeah, totally. Let's do an exercise. I want to do this with you.
Let's hear it.
I didn't tell you we were going to do this.
Okay.
Let's do a little exercise. I was thinking about this last night. All right. Player A, player B. Okay. So player A and player B are both like 25, 26-year-old outfilders. Okay. They're capable defenders.
Okay.
You already know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think so.
They're capable defenders, right? Like, they're not Gold Glovers, but they can play all 3 spots. Okay, and they can, they'll have their gaffes here and there, but like they're fine. You feel fine with them in a major league outfield. Like, it's not they're fine defenders. Okay, so similar profiles that way. They're both fast, both athletic guys. Here's where the differences come in. One of them's a right-handed hitter.
Yeah. Just one of them.
Yeah, one of them's a right-handed hitter. Unless I'm wrong about this, but
I thought you were talking about Teoscar and Grichuk for a second.
Well, no, I'm not. But you know where I'm going.
Okay.
One of them's a right-hander, and in a big minor league sample, has a 750 OPS. Okay. And his AAA sample of that minor league sample, which is also large, is 700 OPS. Okay. Okay. So 700, 750 OPS guy in the minors. Player B, left-handed hitter. Okay. Again, large minor league sample. 850 OPS. AAA sample, large again, 900 OPS. Okay. So you got a 700, 750 OPS guy in minors to a 850, 900 OPS guy in the minors. Yeah. Everything else the same. Who are you giving more opportunities to? So in September, who are you giving more opportunities to in the majors of those 2 players? Player A or player B?
Are there any other distinguishing factors here that I should be aware of?
That's just who they are as players, and that's what they've done.
Okay, so
both outfielders play all 3 spots, capable defenders, they're fast, they'll steal some bases for you.
Okay, so similar base running, similar defense. So if the offense is the remaining variable, then presumably you would give the playing time to the player with the better offensive profile. Yeah. So let's hear some names here. Who's hiding behind those
Player B is Derek Fisher.
Right.
Player A is Anthony Alford.
Interesting.
And I know that people are upset that Anthony Alford's not playing a lot right now, right? And they are upset that Derek Fisher is playing a lot when Anthony Alford is not. Though sometimes you have to remove the names, right? And just look at the players, because we all carry like our own biases into this, right? Like, as a Blue Jays fan, you're upset that the price paid for Derek Fisher, and you've been hearing about how good Anthony Alford's going to be for a long time. Even like my bias is that I want Anthony Alford to succeed.
Yeah.
Because I've covered him for a long time and I've
Yeah.
gotten to know him a bit.
Yeah.
And he's been first class.
Yeah.
He's been great in every interaction. And like, you know, it's a dangerous territory. You never know. And yeah, I know him professionally. I don't know him personally. You never know these guys. Like I had great interactions with Jose Reyes, right? How'd that turn out?
Yeah.
So you never know, but I do want to see Anthony Alford succeed. That's the bias I carry into it. But when you take away the names and you just look at what has happened and you look at their profiles as ball players, of course you're going to give the opportunities to Derek Fisher. Objectively, of course.
Yeah, it's interesting when you phrase it that way, right? Because Alford has, I think, the support of Blue Jays fans, and probably more so than ever after he hit his first Major League home run, which was a walk-off and a really impressive moment for him to end a 15-inning game. Stole a base in that game, legged out an infield hit. He's doing a lot of things right, but I think to your point, you have to separate the anecdotal moment where he hits that walk-off home run from the body of work. And in Derek Fisher's case, he just had a better year. And that's why Jonathan Davis for a while was playing more than Alford. He had a better year than Alford at AAA. And so he was ahead of him on the depth chart. And realistically, you know, I'm not predicting that the Jays will trade Alford. I think the most likely thing is that he'll arrive to spring training 2020 with a chance to make the team. But I would not be surprised if they move him, and I don't think it would take that much. Like if you're an opposing GM and you phone up Ross Atkins and you say, hey, what does it take to get Anthony Alford? We really like him. I think you can have that conversation and get a deal done.
The problem the Blue Jays will face is that if they go to other teams and say, oh, hey, let's try to move Alford, other teams are going to be like, oh, the Jays are taking him off the roster.
Yep.
And then other teams are going to be like, I'm not giving you anything. Yeah. Clearly, you're going to end up DFAing this guy.
Yeah.
So the Blue Jays, it's hard for them to initiate that discussion.
Well, and it's interesting because it reflects just where Alford's value is, right?
Yeah.
Like if they were to go to teams about Ken Giles, teams wouldn't suspect that Ken Giles is going to be DFA'd. They just know, all right, you're not contending, you're going to look at it.
Yeah.
But in the case of Alford, he just hasn't performed that well. He's going to be out of options. And so there isn't that same certainty as to his future in this organization. And it would be, I agree, it would be a lot of fun to see him succeed. We see the potential. He also hit a home run just a few inches foul. Literally the foul pole was shaking beside us in the press box the other day when Alford hit that near home run. So the potential is so clearly there. But like you said, Fisher deserves some run too, given what he has done.
I think that objectively he deserves more run. He deserves the majority of it, just based on what he's done over the course of his career. And look, Anthony, the context with Anthony Alford is that he's always been behind the eight ball because he didn't play as much baseball as a young man as other guys did, because he's playing football, because he's insanely athletic, because the potential of this guy is through the roof. You look at him and it's like, I've made this point before, right? Like professional athletes are generally they just look different than you and I.
Yeah.
Anthony Alford looks different than professional athletes. He is he's a specimen, the guy. So you think that you want to keep giving him chances because it's maybe he'll put it together. He's been behind the eight ball a little bit. But then also, if you just line up the minor league numbers, it's a similar sample, him and Derek Fisher. He's had a lot of plate appearances, and the OPS is 200 points lower at AAA.
Right. And what correlates better with success in the majors? Having a really jacked physique and insane athleticism, or having results at AAA? And I think it's probably having results at AAA is the better measure of what's likely to come next.
And MLB just has this, the beautiful thing about it is it's survival of the fittest, right? It has this self-selection process. So if you keep moving up a level and you get weeded out and you find out if you can hang and if you can't. We found out Derek Fisher can very much hang at AAA. Anthony Alford so far hasn't looked like he could really hang at AAA. He's had some injuries, and his hot streaks, by the way, have been so blistering and so incredible. You're oh man, if okay, that's the potential, right? When your hot streaks are that hot, you're gonna give that guy chances to try to extend that, but the fact that he ended up with a 700 OPS at AAA kind of reflects that, the cold streaks have been pretty cold too. So, like you said, next spring, it's hard to envision both these guys on the Blue Jays 26-man roster. They could do it, but it's hard to envision both of them making it. So if everything stays the same and these guys come to spring next year, both of them still competing for jobs out of options, you got to go edge Derek Fisher right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right. Talk about Nate Pearson?
Yeah, I was going to say I got a question for you, and that is about Nate Pearson, who you wrote the big read about on sportsnet.ca.
Talk about a guy who's going to make headlines at spring next year.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we're going to be talking a lot more about Nate
Yeah.
Pearson, I think, than we are about Derek Fisher and Anthony Alford.
Yeah.
But both worthy of our attention, and especially Pearson. One of the quotes that stood out to me in the piece was you had Zach Bove,
Zach Bove,
who is a college coach of Nate Pearson, who now works for the Minnesota Twins. So this is a guy who is employed by another major league team, saying on the record that he could see Nate Pearson throwing 110 miles an hour.
Yeah.
That's pretty insane.
Yeah, you don't hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Right? And this is like his bias in this is that he's worked with Nate Pearson for a long time, and they he was the college coach at Central Florida, the junior college Nate Pearson went to, so like he knows him well. But and they still work together during the off season, which is kind of cool. They're with different organizations, and they're allowed to keep working together.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, because Nate Pearson actually he didn't buy it, but he contributed a lot of money to a fund to help purchase a Rapsodo machine at Central Florida. So they'll go back and they'll like play around on that in the off seasons. But yeah, he said you could see him throwing 110. I ran it by David Aardsma as well, Blue Jays player development guy, who obviously threw pretty hard in the majors himself. Yeah. And he said, yeah, I don't see any reason why he couldn't throw 110.
So the highest, or the fastest recorded pitch that we know of is Aroldis Chapman, right?
105.8.
Yeah. 105.8.
105.8.
That is insane. Do you see any way that Nate Pearson can throw 110? Like, is that, because I'll be honest, I don't. Like, yeah. I definitely don't. I think 103, he's obviously throwing, what is it, 103, 104?
He's sat at 103 in the Fall League All-Star game.
Must be nice to sit 103. That's insane. But can you see him throwing 110?
He's been up to 104, 105 at his age, and he isn't fully developed yet, right? Like, he's still... we talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. like leaning out. Like Nate Pearson was over 300 pounds in high school. He's down to 245 now.
Big dude,
right? Like, yeah, with his frame, right? Like he's right now 6'6", 245. He's a tight end in the NFL, right? Like he's a massive man with his frame, and if he can learn to move as well as say Aroldis Chapman does, because like that's you talk to people about why Aroldis Chapman can throw as hard as he can. It's the movement efficiency. Yeah. And it's just how compact his delivery is and how easy his power is. Nate Pearson has some of those same attributes, and he works on this stuff. Like he'll go to Driveline, the baseball think tank laboratory outside Seattle, Kyle Body's shop. And he'll work on movement patterns and efficiencies, and they'll record him on high speed cameras and slow down his delivery just to find like little things he can tweak to get a little more velocity, right? To be a little more compact and efficient. His hip to shoulder separation and where his knees are, stuff like that. So if he can keep making those refinements while he is naturally still like growing into himself, right? Like 23, like he's still adding muscle, getting stronger. In a max effort outing, like I think he'll set, if he's throwing one inning out of the Blue Jays bullpen max effort, I think he'll beat Chapman's record.
Really?
I don't know if he'll go to 110. I want to believe he can, because I think it would be great. And I know there was a time when people thought 105 was crazy.
Of course,
right? And we've seen 105.
I would say that time is now. Like, I think 105 is crazy.
Jordan Hicks, right?
Yeah.
Aroldis Chapman. Both
I know.
They like have like repeated one. It's not like just like they touched it once and went away. Like they repeated it. So I think Nate Pearson will definitely set an MLB velocity record if he is pitching max effort out of the bullpen. If he's a starter, obviously he's not going to. He will merely sit 99 to 100. But as a reliever, I could see him definitely breaking Chapman's record.
It's interesting because sometimes you see guys like Jordan Romano come up, and he was known probably more as a 95-mile-an-hour guy. His debut against Baltimore, he was throwing like 98. And so that adrenaline of especially, your first couple outings in the major leagues might give you a little unexpected boost in velocity as well. So you never know. I would love to see it. That would be incredible. And I'll be surprised. I will be pleasantly surprised. It would be exhilarating to watch. But I just... Man, 110 is crazy, and yet you have people in the industry saying it's possible.
And the fear is you bump up against like the limits of what the human body can withstand, right, and what it can do, and like whether it's even a good idea to throw that hard.
And that's one of the things that you get into in the piece, right? Is like the idea of what kind of what are the strains on the human body when you're throwing this hard? What kind of takeaways do you have after talking to people around the Blue Jays and within the industry about that side of velocity?
It's obviously like not a natural thing to do, but Major League pitching is a natural thing to do, right? Like throwing this little rock 100 times as hard as you can every 5 days, like that's not a natural thing to do. So what you're already like starting on that playing field. So what you try to improve are your arm care routines and how you recover from your outings and how you prepare for them and what you do in between. And that's something that's been really important to Nate Pearson. So in spring, like we're going to see him bringing out his bands, right? And he's going to be doing all kinds of bands exercises. He's worked with you've seen Trevor Bauer's wiggle stick, right? Like that big long, like it's like a javelin.
Yeah.
He holds it out. And like, I love when Trevor Bauer comes to town because like just watching him warm up is amazing.
Yeah.
The long toss routines that they do and some of the drive line protocols and programming in terms of what type of intensity and effort you throw with when you long toss and how far you go to. You'll see Trevor Bauer throwing like basically foul pole to foul pole in his warm-up for a game. Plyo balls, like the weighted ball stuff. So it's like Steve Delabar was like playing around with this back in the day. You're whipping weighted balls, really high intensity movements like at walls, and it's short bursts, and you're not doing that 100 times, but you're doing it, a number of times in between your outings to help strengthen your arm and keep your muscles as prepared as possible to withstand what you're doing. So that's really that's where you're trying to find your edge, is in your arm care, because pitching's an unnatural thing. Like the arm, you're not supposed to do it, but that's Major League Baseball. So you find the best way to allow yourself to stay healthy through that.
Yeah, and it keeps you away from looking at something like arm injuries or arm trouble, Tommy John surgery as an inevitability, because certainly for these pitchers, they want to believe that they can get through the season and get through a career without serious arm injuries. And it would be a bit defeatist to say that just because you throw hard, you are sentenced to 1 year out of every 5 rehabbing from Tommy John surgery.
Yeah, totally. And everything that Nate Pearson is doing is data driven. Is the other thing, right? Like it's not just like, this guy says you should do this, and that's what everyone else does. Like there's a reason for everything that he's doing, even in the improvements he's making with his slider and his curveball, which are the pitches that are going to allow him to be a starter, which are going to allow him to like not set a velocity record at all, to just be a starting pitcher, right? And pitch every 5 days as an ace, which is the best outcome here, is like 200 inning front of the rotation Justin Verlander guy, like not Aroldis Chapman. Like that's not the best outcome. Verlander's the best outcome here. So working on the slider and the curveball, he is using data to inform every tweak that he makes. He is throwing on Rapsodos and with high-speed cameras, and he is looking at his spin axis and his break and his movement and how to get the most out of his spin rate, his spin efficiency, and he is looking at very minor little things that he can do with the way he grips the ball, the way, it comes out of off of his fingers, with, his arm and everything. And everything that he does, like there's a reason for it based in empirical evidence. Like it's not just, when David Aardsma was pitching, he did this, right? Like Aardsma's in the piece talking about how when he was throwing, like he just listened to what other people said and what other people did a lot of eye wash, like a lot of work that wasn't necessary and he didn't need to do. And then later in his career, like he discovered biomechanics, and he discovered movement patterning, and he discovered, some of the numbers that he can use to inform how he's working to get himself better, and was able to squeeze one more year out of his arm late in his career. It was too late for him. He was in his mid-30s. But Nate Pearson now is using this stuff in his early 20s, which is kind of the difference.
Yeah, exactly. And he's surrounded by people like Aardsma or Gil Kim, other people within the Blue Jays player development system, who are selected in part because they believe that this scientific approach can actually be useful. And I don't think that's really a controversial belief at this point in time, just pretty much rational, I would say, but it wasn't always the case. So that's an interesting thing. I wanted to ask too about the kind of mental side and where you think Nate Pearson is mentally, just because we've seen these guys adjust to the majors in different ways, right? With Bichette bringing this ultra confidence to the major leagues, Cavan Biggio more of a quiet professionalism. We've seen guys like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. be relatively quiet, at least in his dealings with us when he gets to the major leagues. What do you think Pearson will be like? Like, what's your assessment of where, how his personality will enter the major leagues?
He's a quiet kid. He's pretty unassuming, pretty shy. Like, he's in his early 20s, right? But he's not going to be making a lot of headlines with what he says, I don't think. Like, I think he's going to let what he does on the mound kind of speak for him. Like, the cool thing is seeing him be emotional on the mound and seeing him, like, get fired up on the mound, because he does. I had someone describe a moment that he had in Vancouver when this is, like, during his debut, like, a couple of years ago, and like he hit the first batter, or like he walked him on 4 pitches or something like that, and he was obviously like upset about how that played out. And then he came back and struck out the next 3 on 9 consecutive pitches, like 9 strikes. So did an immaculate inning just after walking the first guy. And this was in the playoffs for Vancouver. And he had what was described to me as like a Roger Clemens moment, where he's just like screaming on the mound and like pounding his glove and like super, super fired up. So like that's going to be cool to watch. Yeah. I think that off the field, he's just going to be a quiet guy who goes about his business, like works hard, loves the game, like that type of thing. He really does love the game, which is what's cool and what can separate guys like that who, big bonuses, like they've made their money, like first round pick, all that stuff. Like, what's the carrot for guys like that, right? Like, what's the motivator? Same thing with like Vlad, right? Like he's going to have to love this game in order to get the most out of it. Because he's a Guerrero. He goes back to the Dominican. He's good, man. Like, life's sweet. You got $4 million when he's 16, right? Yeah. So what's your carrot? What's your motivator? What pushes you to, like, put in all of that hard work that we don't see, that fans don't see, like, away from the cameras, to grind through that stuff that Nate Pearson's grinding through right now? What's your motivator? It has to be a love of the game and a desire to, like, not just be great, but be elite. Like, a desire to be one of the best at what you do, and I think that right now Nate Pearson has that.
It's interesting because guys can put pressure on themselves on the one hand, and that can veer too far. We've seen guys like Colby Rasmus where it really eats them up, and it's tough. But at the same time, for guys who put so much pressure on themselves and they expect so much, it can almost be a good thing, where then the pressure that we might inadvertently put on him or the fans might put on him, when you look at him in relation to some of the other pitching prospects in the staff, you say, wow, this is really, they need Pearson to be good for this thing to work out. Well, if he's already putting so much pressure on himself, then those outside expectations aren't necessarily as significant.
Yeah, and I do think he's going to be very good, by the way. Like, I think he is going to be an exceptional major league pitcher. Is that as a starter or as a reliever? Like, he wants to be a starter, and the Blue Jays want him to be a starter. And if his fastball obviously is elite, if he can continue to make the strides he's made with his breaking pitches, his curveball, which he can flip in for strikes, his slider, which is like his out pitch, like that's his swing and miss, and then a changeup that's 91. So like a changeup that's Zach Greinke's fastball, which is like not a bad changeup, right? Like a pitch that he's actually got a pretty good feel for. If he can maintain that repertoire, like, and he can, be as strong and durable as he's been to this point, why not? I think he can be a really good starter. The other outcome is, okay, you're a really good reliever because you're throwing like 104, 105, maybe even more with a wipeout slider. That's a pretty good profile too. It's going to come down to the durability aspect, really. And we've seen him, he dealt with a little intercostal thing, and he's had like a little hip issue. Obviously broke his arm. Like, he's already a big leaguer if he hadn't broken his arm, I think. If he hadn't gotten that comebacker in his first start with Dunedin in 2018, I think his 2018 is what he did in 2019, and then he would have already been here, I think, because there would just be, what are you leaving him at AAA for at that point?
And at a certain point, you're wasting bullets, so to speak. I do think at some point early next year, maybe it's May, we'll see him up here. He's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
It's going to be interesting to see how they handle him out of the gate next year. And the Blue Jays have been pretty open to working with him with what he wants to do in terms of managing his workload. Nice. Like this year, he chose the 5 innings, 2 innings thing, like from some scenarios that were presented to him, and because he's aware that the Blue Jays are going to try to limit his innings, right? Like, one of the biggest predictors of injury is a big innings jump. So the Blue Jays are going to try to limit that. And I think this year he threw something like 4 times as many innings as the year prior or something. Right. So it's a really significant jump. So the Blue Jays, he's going to have an innings limit next year. How the Blue Jays approach that will be interesting. Do you just let him have a normal spring and start the year, and maybe you run into a point in September where you got to shut him down? Or do you bring him along slowly at the beginning? Maybe he delays the beginning of his spring training. Maybe he doesn't make his minor league debut until a couple weeks into the season or something. Or maybe his first couple outings are capped at 5 innings. so that you have a better chance of him, still pitching at the end of September. I'm not saying the Blue Jays are going to go to the postseason next year, but if they were in a position, if they were in a wild card race, you don't want to have to be saying, "Oh man, one of our best young pitchers, we have to shut him down right now."
Yeah.
So I wonder if they'll do it the other way around, and they'll start him slowly, and just to allow him to have a more full season.
Yeah, I could see that, and would have the added bonus of really reducing some of those questions about service time. Because the Blue Jays will, of course, manipulate his service time, keep him down for at least the first month of the season. And if he's still ramping up as far as his innings at that point, then it makes complete sense that he wouldn't be up there. So that would be one little side benefit for the Jays.
And he's going to force that issue in spring, because if we do see him pitch in spring training on the big league side, which I assume we will, and if he's throwing, think about a short spring training outing when you're only going out for like 2 innings or something. He's probably going to be working pretty hard. 103, 104, and he's going to be working against hitters who are not yet ready, who are still getting their swings down. He's going to be blowing fastballs by guys.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to be writing about how good he looks and how he should be on the team right now.
Of course, on day 24 of spring training, you've already written everything else, and Nate Pearson's on the mound. You're obviously going to write about Pearson and it's, how exciting his promise is for the Jays. So that should be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating to watch him make the transition. Thanks to Amal, as always, our producer. Thanks to Drew for running the cameras. You're Ben Nicholson-Smith. I'm Martin Zwelling. Next week, we're going to have a season wrap, a little off-season preview. We'll get Shai Davidi in here, and we'll talk about all that stuff. We'll also recap the over-unders next week as well once we finish this thing out. So we'll talk to you then. This has been At the Letters.